Ever had a holiday gift that wasn't wrapped but still split your world in two? Christmas morning, my daughter looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not family," while the scent of cinnamon rolls still hung in the air. Name's Elias Corwin, 55 pension fund manager, and my hand was on the cool glass of a framed photo that at the time was still whole Christmas morning, December 25th, 2021. The wind rattled the old cedar siding and set the ribbon on the stair rail trembling. Cinnamon rolls cooled on a rack by the window glaze, turning glassy. Miranda stood by the mantel in her coat, as if the house belonged to the weather now. "You're not family," she said. Not loud, just sharp, cleaner than the cold that seeped under the door. Piper's smile stalled. Rowan froze with a toy car at the edge of the trunk we use as a table. Graham blinked, recalibrating his salesman's warmth. I set my mug down so it wouldn't clink. My hand found the framed photo on the mantel, Vera sunlit in a linen dress. Me younger, Miranda 14, and pretending not to smile. The glass was spotless. I'd polished it at dawn the way you steady yourself before the day begins. "Is this about the house?" I asked, "or about my coffee?" Graham gave a quick laugh. "Market's ideal, Elias. We could list quietly place you as a tenant." Roll proceeds into a project that Graham, Miranda said. A warning squeezed thin. She turned to me. "We've talked for months. You said you'd think about it." Her eyes slid over the garland the wooden birds Vera hung every December. "You're alone in a museum. It's time to let go." "Museums keep what matters," I said. "They don't sell it to the highest bidder." Piper lifted her phone, then set it down like she remembered where she was. "Can we do stockings now?" she asked the room. "In a minute," I said. Miranda's smile faltered. Something old and hurt showed through. "If you won't help us, at least stop pretending this is a home." She grabbed her keys. "I need a drive." The door opened to a sheet of white. The wind carried out the last of her heat. The house exhaled. Wood popped in the stove. The lights blinked as the plow roared by. Graham stayed coat half on, half off. "She'll cool down," he said. "Holidays aren't easy." He perched on the arm of a chair, palm draped across the back like he was measuring it. "Let me show you comps. And next time, let me make the coffee. Yours tastes like you're trying not to enjoy it." "Maybe I like limits," I said. He smiled as if I'd agreed. "Think about it." He stamped snow from his boots and left a clean pair of holes on the stoop. I cleared paper from the rug, smoothed a few pieces for next year, stacked boxes by size. Piper leaned against the doorway, studying me the way children study weather. "Is Mom mad at you?" she whispered. "She's mad at the day," I said, and that seemed close enough to true. She nodded, took Rowan's hand, and shepherded him to the kitchen, where the cinnamon rolls had lost their steam, but not their sweetness. I refilled my mug. Steam curled over my fingers. Her perfume still hung faint in the doorway. The framed photo caught a stray flash of winter sun, a summer trapped behind glass. For a long breath, I let the room be ordinary. The hiss of the radiator, the soft tick of the mantel clock, the faint crackle from the stove. My phone buzzed on the mantel. Subject line: urgent vote on Deck 27. From the pension committee chair: numbers look off. Need you present. The glow of the screen flickered against the frosted window and then faded. I set the phone beside Vera's smile and listened to the wind decide what to do with our street next. The committee room always smells like burnt coffee and paper dust, but today the scent clung to the air the way bad ideas cling to a balance sheet. Fluorescent lights hummed loud enough to pass for conversation. Through the blinds, I could see the parking lot crusted in gray snow cars, idling like they were unsure whether to stay. I projected the pension spreadsheet. Red flags dotted the screen like a rash. "If we move into these instruments," I said, keeping my voice level, "we're not diversifying, we're gambling. Correlations spike in stress. When one falls, the others follow." Pete, who still chews his pen caps, chewed hard enough to leave teeth marks. May folded her hands, knuckles white. "What's the upside?" Pete asked, as if he were obliged to give temptation its day in court. 5% if we're lucky," I said. "A catastrophe if we're not. And we don't get to call the timing." Silence. I let the numbers do their second job, frightened. Alden sat along the wall visitor's chair, a legal pad on his knee, Mont Blanc pen tapping an absent waltz. He didn't interrupt. Good mentors don't steal a scene that isn't theirs. May cleared her throat. We vote, she said. Hands rose one by one. The motion failed. The red flags stayed on the screen, but they felt less like signs and more like warnings we'd heeded. People exhaled, chairs scraped. Someone finally poured the coffee. It tasted like scorched bark, but it was warm. When the board shuffled out, Alden stayed. He waited until the door latched. Good save, he said. It's Tuesday, I said. We'll need another on Thursday. He smiled with half his mouth. Let's talk about your house. My house is not the pension, I said, though lately they felt like cousins' two ledgers I kept watch over at night. That's why we put locks on the right doors. He drew a small box on his pad. Title in your name alone, yes. Any liens, no. Anyone trying to make themselves useful to you with helpful paperwork. He raised an eyebrow. Graham loves paperwork, I said. Alden capped the pen. Then we should meet somewhere neutral, Maple Diner tomorrow. Coffee that tastes like coffee. We'll outline options. Figurative locks first, literal if we have to. He patted my shoulder a touch light enough to ignore if I wanted to, and left me with the hum of the lights and the cursor still blinking on a sea of cells. I shut down the projector and watched the room return to its small size. Outside, the wind braided snow across the lot. My breath fogged the glass as I waited for the defroster to remember its job. On the drive home, I counted mailboxes that leaned like old men in a storm. I didn't mean to think of Miranda, but memory is not a democracy. HOA Dues PTA suggested donations, the fundraiser with the glossy brochure, and the smiling children who must be paid for. Somehow these thoughts turned up like junk mail you swear you already recycled. After dark, my phone lit up with her name. Dad, she said, honey poured over sandpaper. Graham's got an opportunity that closes this week. It's really about family positioning. Miranda, I said, I'm driving. I'll be quick. He found an anchor client. If we seed now, we're top of the cap table. The cap table, I repeated as if it were a hymn I'd forgotten the words to. You don't have to sell anything right away, she said. Just signal intent. A letter. People want to help us if they know you're behind us. The turn signal clicked patient as a metronome. I'll think. I said, which is the safest sentence a grown man can use on a child who wants something. We hung up politely, which is not the same as kindly. My porch light carved a triangle out of the snow. Something yellow glowed at the base of the door like a warning buoy. I bent and plucked it free, a folded HOA notice heavy stock, bold red letters across the top. Overdue, immediate attention required. The paper was cold enough to bite. Inside, I shook the snow from my coat and slid a finger under the flap. The number printed in the middle of the page sat there like a dare, more than Miranda earns in a month, and late fees already nibbling at the edges. I read it twice, then once backward, the way I do with account numbers to make sure I've seen what I've seen. The radiator hissed. Somewhere a branch thumped the siding. I laid the notice on the oak trunk next to the stack of gift paper we'd saved. The red letters bled a little where the snow had soaked through. I stood there a long minute with my hand flat on the page, feeling the cold lift into my palm, and wondered how much heat I had left to give. Graham arrived with Henrietta hooked to his arm, like a brooch, her perfume finding me before her gloved hand did. Strong and floral, the kind that keeps talking after the wearer stops. Sunlight split through the frosted panes and laid a bright bar across the rug. Graham smiled wider than the weather warranted and shrugged off his coat without asking, all ease and charm, as if the house had been waiting for him. Always so warm in here, he said, rubbing his hands near the stove like a pilgrim at a shrine. You keep it at what, a steady 72? Warmth is cheaper than repairs, I said. Henrietta's eyes made a slow circuit of the room, never quite appearing to look. The antique mantel clock caught her for a beat. I felt myself adjust the framed photo beside it. Habits are tells, my old audit chief used to say. Lovely, she murmured, stepping closer. 1890s French. Is it insured? It tells the hour, I said. That's all I ask of it. Graham launched small talk like test balloon school closures, the plow contract, the town council, and guided each drift gently toward a question. Values north of the green have jumped, Elias. A property like this. People are bidding sight unseen. You'd be stunned. I prefer to see, I said, and to sleep. He laughed and accepted the deflection as if it were a handshake. No rush, it's just timing is everything. Timing, Henrietta echoed, eyes back on the clock. So many people forget that until it's late. She turned to me. Your daughter mentioned the yard needs work. I know a landscaper, she added, which sounded more like a threat than help. Snow covers all sins until April, I said. We sat. Graham positioned himself at the arm of the chair the way he had on Christmas morning, his palm draped like a placard over the upholstery. Henrietta perched on the edge of the sofa, ankles crossed, a posture that said she could leave or stay and would lose nothing either way. He wandered to pricing again, as if we'd taken a short scenic detour, and now returned to the highway comps, cash buyers, a quiet listing with a premium for speed. I steered him into potholes, insurance riders, septic inspection, lead times, until the road lost its appeal. They left with pleased goodbyes, a cloud of perfume, and the faintest lipstick print on my air. Their footprints filled with sun in the walk before the wind erased them. I locked the door more for my rhythm than for safety and found my coat. The HOA envelope still rode shotgun yellow corner peeking from beneath the seatbelt. I told myself to drop it at the office and kept driving past. Maple Diner's windows sweated from the inside. A waitress had wedged a folded napkin under the corner to catch the runnel. Alden was already in the back booth, coat beside him, a manila envelope centered between the salt and the ketchup. The coffee mug he slid toward me was chipped on the rim, white porcelain showing through, like bone. Watch your lip, he said, which is a fair summary of our friendship. He didn't waste time. Plan B, he said, tapping the envelope. Tighten title, freeze posture, document intent. His Mont Blanc drew small squares in the condensation on the glass. And this. He pulled out a single-page county clerk printout time-stamped last week. Someone pulled your property records. I read the bolded parcel ID, felt the familiar thrum in my chest. That comes when a pattern steps out of the fog. Which someone, public terminal Alden, said, no name. He paused. Be ready for creative approaches. I watched the waitress refill the next booth without asking a small faith. I've always admired in Vermont. People assume you know what you want. Creative how? Charm, paperwork, urgency that pretends to be care. He slid the envelope across. Locks, Elias. We put them on before we need them. We worked until the window cleared and fogged again. I left with the envelope zipped in my coat and the chipped mug's warmth still in my hand. In the car, the HOA notice glared at me like a school principal. I turned the key and sat while the blower coughed itself awake. My phone buzzed. A text from Graham, cheerful as a postcard. Next time, let me make the coffee. Before dawn, the knock came soft, hurried, then soft again, as if Graham were practicing being considerate. When I opened the door, snowflakes rode in on his coat. He held up a paper bag from the corner cafe, grease shadow at the bottom. Special roast stamped in cheerful italics. Thought we could start fresh, he said, too cheerful for the hour. Coffee fixes most things. In the kitchen, the kettle began to whisper. The radiator under the window added its steady hiss. Graham unpacked 3 mismatched mugs from my cupboard like a magician borrowing props. Henrietta followed, pale under good makeup, sniffling delicately. Still a touch of a cold, she said, as if apologizing to the porcelain. Graham insisted on pouring. You sit, he told me. Steam laced the air with a rich, dark aroma that didn't read quite right. Years of quality control do that to your brain. You learn the difference between dark and scorched, between nutty and something that wants to be nutty. I watched the stream, the color, the bloom. He set a particular cup in front of me and nudged it a fraction closer than necessary. Yours, he said. Smile held too long. I smiled back. Reached for the kettle. I'll top off the others. In the shuffle, his sleeve brushing my wrist, the spoon clinking the ceramic. I slid my cup an inch to the left, drew Henrietta's an inch to the right, then rotated both as if aligning handles. I've done this with invoices and contracts, change a column order, and people forget what they meant to emphasize. We carried the mugs to the living room. Snow thickened outside. Church bells threw a thin sound through the cold. Henrietta sipped, set her cup down, lifted it again. Graham lounged at the arm of the chair, coat unbuttoned, eyes on my hands, instead of his own drink. At first it was only a tremor. Henrietta's teacup rattled against the saucer. A drop leaped onto her glove. She tried to laugh it off and couldn't find the laugh. Her shoulders tightened. Her breath shortened into fast, shallow stitches. I stood knocking the mantel with my hip. The framed photo lost its balance and hit the hearth glass, shattering into a bright, mean glitter. "Henrietta," I said. She reached for air mist and folded into the armchair like someone whose bones had forgotten their plan. Graham didn't move. His face blanked the way sky blanks before a squall. Then he whispered almost politely, as if correcting a seating chart. "It was supposed to be you." I was already dialing. "Mapleford emergency," I said, when the dispatcher answered. "Female 60s sudden collapse. Conscious but failing, possible reaction unknown." Graham backed into the kitchen. The cafe bag slumped on the counter, a narrow receipt stuck out of the trash time-stamped with our morning. The kettle had gone from whisper to thin scream. Sirens came quick in snow, a long red-blue braid, turning the window into stained glass. I crouched to pick up the fallen photo, careful of the shards. Vera's smile ran under the crack like a creek under ice. Mapleford General smells like antiseptic and fear. December 28th, 2021, 3 days. But it feels longer. Snow is piled in blue-gray ridges below the narrow window. Someone has traced a heart in the frost from the outside, then the wind smeared it into a thumbprint. The ICU door sighs when I push it. Machines keep their own shy conversation, a soft new of oxygen, the steady metronome of a monitor that means for now. Henrietta's eyelids flutter. The skin at her temples is thin as onion paper, her lipstick a shade braver than her pulse. When she finds me, the look in her eyes lands like a fragile truce. Her fingers twitch toward mine, a small wing beating against the weight of the sheets. I heard she breathes the words arranged with care around pain. He said, "End it, not you." Her eyes search my face to measure how much I already know. Who Detective Laurel Keene asks from the foot of the bed, voice low, so it doesn't break the rhythm here. Alden stands beside me, coat folded over his arm, his presence as steady as the IV pole. Graham, Henrietta whispers. He talks on the phone. Too loud. A faint smile ghosts her mouth, as if that is an old complaint she's tried not to make. "Time," Keene asks. Her pencil waits. "Night after Christmas," Henrietta says. The monitor ticks a little faster, then settles. Alden leans in, not to crowd but to tether. "Elias," he murmurs without looking away from her timing and evidence. "Let what you've heard be the start, not the case." I nod. In my pocket, my phone vibrates like a small, persistent conscience. The committee. I glance at Keene. She tilts her chin. "Take it." I step to the window, thumb the speaker on. A conference room breathes into the ICU chair legs, paper shuffling, the throat clear of urgency. "We've all read Elias's memo," May says. "We vote now. Hold your positions," I say into the room, pitching my voice to the cheap mic. "Stress correlations will erase whatever upside you think you're buying. We protect the people who gave us their years." There's a second of silence in which I can hear Henrietta's oxygen whisper and the hospitalization of my own breath. Then hands raised that I cannot see, but can imagine. "Motion fails," May says. Relief spreads down the line like heat from a radiator. "Good work," someone adds, and the call ends with the soft click of a decision landing in its place. When I turn back, Alden is sliding a single sheet into my folder. The paper crackles a sound that always makes me think of winter. "Power of attorney," he says, keeping his voice for me alone. "Medical and financial." Don't sign from fear, sign from clarity. Think about who you trust when you're the one not speaking. Henrietta moistens her lips. "Eli," as she says. And I take her hand because there is nothing else to do with hands in this room. "You, old-fashioned. Good, but careful." She coughs once, a dry bark that shakes her. Keene's eyes flick to the monitor. The line holds. Footsteps in the hall, men trying to walk softly in shoes that don't. Graham comes in with his good coat and his bad timing, eyes skimming the tubes, the beeps my face. "How is she?" he asks, but it sounds like, "What did she say?" Keene takes one easy step that places her between us. The small badge on her belt glints like a period at the end of a sentence. "You can wait outside, Mr. Fox," she says, and there's enough porch swing in her voice to sound friendly enough steel to make it not a suggestion. He looks at Henrietta. If there's grief, it hides behind calculation. Mother, he says, testing whether the word will function. Henrietta's gaze slides past him like he's a reflection on the glass. Not now, she breathes and closes her eyes as if pulling a door. Graham's mouth thins. He starts to speak again. Keen's pencil lifts a millimeter permission to think twice. He does. The door sighs him back into the hallway. I bend closer. Henrietta, I say, if there's more you can... Her fingers tighten, a surprising strength, then loosen. Her lips shape a single name, careful, as if it might break Miranda. Breath leaves the syllables and doesn't return for a few long counts, while the monitor holds the room together. Then the nurse arrives with a syringe of quiet, and Henrietta drifts into the soft state approved forgetting that will keep her alive a little longer. Outside, the snow throws light up into the room, so we all look a shade kinder. Alden's hand rests on the folder with the POA. Keen notes a time on her pad. I stand with my palm flat against the cold window, reading back the imprint of a heart the wind tried to erase. The fluorescent lights at Mapleford PD hummed like a tired beehive. Coffee and styrofoam tasted of apology and cardboard. Keen's pen hovered over her notebook, the nib already smudged with ink from earlier notes, waiting for the final push that turned suspicion into charge. Henrietta had woken again at the hospital, voice steadier. It wasn't just Graham, she told Keen, each word placed carefully on the air. Miranda was part of it. By the time I reached the station, the warrants were signed. Doors opened with that heavy institutional sigh, and officers moved with the briskness of people glad to be doing something simple, escort seat record. They brought Graham in first, agitated hair too neat for how he felt. He sat, then stood, then sat again, a salesman without a pitch. Miranda followed, cheeks raw from crying mascara, pooling at the edges like storm water. She didn't look at me. She looked at the table, at the mirror, at her hands. She had been a child who never liked mirrors. Now she couldn't stop checking whether they would forgive her. Keen's voice was calm to the point of kind. We have reason to believe you conspired, legal phrases lined up like fence posts. Graham broke first, as people like Graham do when the fence is taller than they expected. I handled the coffee, he said, chin up like he'd found a noble angle. But Miranda, she wanted it more. She said we'd never. He cut himself off, discovering for the first time the edge of a sentence. Miranda snapped her head up. That's not... Then she saw Keen place a phone on the table. An evidence sticker half peeled at one corner. Keen tapped play. The room filled with a voice I knew better than my own. We'll never get what we deserve as long as he's alive. Miranda, on a different day, a different room. The acoustics made the syllables precise. A chair creaked in the recording fabric against wood. Somewhere a bird called. But the sentence was the only thing that mattered. I didn't speak. There are truths you can't out-talk. My throat worked the way a stalled engine works noise without motion. Keen's pen made a small note, the kind that will later anchor a paragraph. The heating vent murmured at ankle level, warm air turning cold halfway up. Graham leaned back, relief creeping in where courage should be. See, he said softly to no one and everyone. Miranda's tears sharpened. Dad, she said, looking at me as if the room had emptied and there were only two of us left. It's out of context. You know me. You know I was upset. I say things when I... Her hands fluttered birds in a cage no one else could see. She waited for me to contradict the recording, to be the father who explains the weather away. I didn't. My hands stayed flat on my knees, one vein pulsing against the pant seam. I looked at her the way you look at a painting up close. So close you can't see the picture anymore. Only strokes, only errors, only brilliance where none was intended. Miranda, I said. And the name felt like glass in my mouth. Enough. Keen slid a tissue box across. It bumped Miranda's elbow. Mrs. Fox, she said, you have the right to remain silent. The rest unfurled in a tone that had done this before and would do it again. Paperwork sprouted. The room shrank to the size of signatures. Graham asked for water and was given the kind that tastes of the bottle. Miranda stared at the ink smear on Keen's thumb as if it were a map out. I stood when they stood. My knees reminded me I was not the age I felt a minute ago. Through the glass wall of the lobby, Piper and Rowan sat side by side on a vinyl bench jacket zipped to their chins, feet not quite touching the floor. Rowan held a paper cup with both hands as if warming a small bird. Piper traced a line on the fogged pane with one finger, drawing nothing in particular. They were waiting for the adult who would tell them which way the weather was moving. They had no idea what had just happened 3 doors away. Back home, the house felt like a coat I hadn't worn in a while, stiff at the shoulders, familiar at the cuffs. Early January light filtered through the lace curtains in thin strips, the kind of pale that promises a thaw without committing. Piper came in clutching her sketch pad to her chest. Rowan gripped the block of cedar I'd been carving, his fingers planted in the grain like roots. "Workshop's open," I said, which in this house means the kitchen table. I spread an old towel, set down sandpaper in 3 grades, a tin of pencils. Colored sticks with their paper jackets half peeled. Rowan took the block and started with the coarsest grit, pushing with the seriousness that boys reserve for small important work. Piper sat with her back straight and tested the pencils on the margin color bars like weather bands. The smell of fresh-cut cedar rose as Rowan scraped a clean sweetness that makes you think of closets and summers you thought would last. The stove ticked its steady tick. The kettle let one polite sigh, then settled. We spoke in short, quiet sentences that didn't ask for answers. "Do you think it should be a bird or a boat?" Rowan asked without looking up. "Start with a shape you can keep," I said. "The bird will show up if it wants to." Piper drew me with too much hair and kinder shoulders than I own. She drew herself and Rowan, holding my hands, all of us slightly taller than we are, as if the paper wanted us to reach something. She didn't draw their parents. She didn't erase them either. The blank space was its own kind of line. Henrietta came just before noon, leaning on a cane that belonged to a younger woman in a different decade. She wore lipstick and courage. When she saw the children, her eyes filled the way windows do before a storm and cleared the same way. "I brought cookies I shouldn't be eating," she said, handing over a tin with both hands. Piper opened it, breathed in the cinnamon, and set one on each napkin like an usher. We drank cocoa Alden brought when he arrived an hour later. 2 paper cups in a cardboard carrier steamed, twisting into the weak light. He didn't take off his coat. He never stays long when he knows I'm trying to build something with both hands. "Reverend's thinking," he said, leaning on the door jamb, "about a community house. Classes of food pantry on Thursdays. Maybe a free tax prep night if I can bribe you with pie." "Pie is persuasive," I said. Rowan sanded in patient circles, smaller and smaller. Piper shaded our faces so the noses made sense. The room warmed into itself. Henrietta sat and watched a queen on a modest throne, feet flat on the rug so she could push herself up if needed. "You look like your mother when you draw," she told Piper. "Same lip when it decides." Piper glanced at the repaired photo frame on the mantel glass, replaced corners, re-glued the faintest gold line of epoxy where the crack had been. I had set it at eye level, not in defiance, but in memory. Sunlight caught the repaired edge and made it less scar and more seam. Rowan held up the cedar. The block had become a boat with a bird suggestion in the bow. "It's both," he announced, proud of the compromise the world so rarely offers. "Hang the picture?" Piper asked softly, but like a decision already made. We found the spare tack in the blue dish by the phone, the one with pennies that don't fit any roll. Rowan climbed onto the trunk while I steadied it with a foot. He pressed the paper to the wall beside the frame and pushed the tack in with his thumb. It went in crooked, then straight. The drawing looked unafraid next to the older photo, new brightness beside a repaired shine. Henrietta made a sound I've only heard when someone recognizes their own life from a kinder angle. Alden cleared his throat for effect, and no reason. The house settled around the moment, the way a good chair takes your weight without comment. The phone rang. Reverend Whitford's voice came through, with its Sunday warmth even on a weekday. "Elias," he said, "if you're up for it, a few of us are meeting tomorrow night to talk through this community house idea. No pressure, just planning." I looked at the boat bird at the drawing at the seam of gold in the glass. Rowan had cocoa on his upper lip. Piper's pencil had smudged the heel of her hand gray. "I'll be there," I said, and the kettle, as if pleased to be included, let out its small, agreeing sigh. The banner strung across my old porch read, "Mapleford Community House, grand opening," blue letters against clean white snapping softly in the early spring light. The siding had a fresh coat. The windows shone as if they'd learned a new way to catch sun. Inside, folding tables lined the hallway. Tax prep sign-up sheets, a schedule for after-school tutoring, a flyer for beginner watercolors with Piper Tuesdays. The house had never been louder or more itself. Piper and Rowan raced each other down the hall, sneakers squeaking, laughter echoing in the stairwell where the garland used to hang. Rowan skidded to a stop at the old mantel. The repaired family photo sat at eye level, the gold seam in the glass, thin as a vein. Beside it, a new frame waited, face down, paper taped over the front. Reverend Whitford cleared his throat into the mic that didn't need him. Friends, he said, homes outlast the people who build them because memory chooses its own foundations. Today we open a place for the town to put its memories. He looked at me. Elias, would you? I stepped up, notes folded small in my palm and unnecessary. A house isn't a bank account, I said. It's a ledger of voices. You hear them in the hinges, in the places paint can't reach. We live in rooms that others made ready for us. If we're fortunate, we leave a light on for the next ones. The smell of apple pie from the bake sale drifted through the doorway and made the rest of the speech feel less like speech and more like air. After people pressed my hand. A retiree from the shop floor, the man who keeps a quarter on his keychain to measure tread, leaned close. You saved our winters, he said, voice low. Another nodded toward the bulletin board, where pension Q&A was thumbtacked between ESL classes and a flyer for Little League. Quiet thanks has a different weight than applause. It settles somewhere you can carry. Alden stood at the back, coat open, smile. Brief and satisfied. He didn't come forward. He didn't have to. Henrietta was in the front row, lipstick bold cane, hooked over the chair beside her. She looked like someone who had walked through fire and found a parlor on the other side. Piper tugged her sleeve and with a small ceremony set the new frame on her lap. Look, she said. We unveiled together. Piper's drawing showed the three of us, me in the center, her to one side, Rowan to the other, and behind us, slightly smaller, Henrietta with a hand lifted, as if blessing what she saw. The lines were sure. The sky was a wide, unbroken blue. Reverend drew the ribbon away from a brass plaque by the door. The metal caught the sun and held it. In honor of Elias and Vera Corwin, it read. And for a second the room sounded like our kitchen on a good Sunday, cups touching saucers. The low hum of contentment, the sense that you could stay. The crowd clapped. Somewhere behind the noise I heard the stove's old tick in memory. Henrietta's smile found mine and stayed. Piper's hand slipped into my jacket pocket and came back with a coiled string. Can we fly the kite now? She whispered. Eyes already turned toward the field behind the church, where the last snow was giving up. We ran 3 shadows long on the new grass, the kite a folded promise under my arm. At the edge of the slope, the wind reached for us. I raised my arms and felt the tug clean and bright in my palms. The kite climbed the line, sang, and for a long minute all of Mapleford stood under a sky big enough to keep what we'd decided to give away. That spring afternoon, the repaired photo frame caught a stripe of sun on the mantel, the gold seam warm under my fingertips. The house felt lighter now, filled with the hum of voices that belonged, and the wind outside seemed to carry only promise. I'd learned that justice isn't just in the courts, it's in the choices we make to rebuild, to welcome, to forgive. Sometimes bridges collapse, so we can see which ones are worth crossing again. If you've ever faced a loss that turned into a doorway, you know the quiet kind of hope it brings. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Share your story. I'd like to hear it.